Hey everybody. One of my favorite little things about the school year is when at the end of the Gettysburg lesson, it's just my favorite one of the year, and I've talked to you guys about that before, but at the end of it, then I recite the Gettysburg Address, and it's really fun and everything. But then the next day, we go through it a little bit, and I end up it's just a really good time to go through it, and you learn a lot about Lincoln and a lot about the time and a lot about what was talked about and stuff like that. And so I think I thought I'd make a little video just talking about that, just so you don't miss out on a few of those things. So anyway, you already kind of learned about the backstory and stuff like that, so I don't want to go into that. And so obviously it's a really short speech, so we'll just go over all the words and stuff here. So he says, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So when he says 7, a score is, of course, 20. You may have worked that out or looked that up or something like that. A score is 20, and then 7, of course. And that, if you do the math, that takes you back to 1776. But another thing is that if you talk about a score, that is something that is referenced in the Bible. And so that is going to be something that a lot of the listeners would have picked up on as well. This is feeling kind of religious. And we've talked about in class about how this is a deeply religious time. And there, in the first words of the speech, he is letting people know that, this is kind of a religious time, a religious feeling, a religious speech. And so anyway, 7, so 87 years prior to 1863 was 1776. It was not 1787, and that's an important distinction. So our country really starts at two different foundings, right? We have the Declaration of Independence during the War for Independence, the Revolution, Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence and all that stuff, and we become independent. But then there's also a second founding that happens 11 years later, where we write the Constitution, and then we eventually the states ratify the Constitution. And so Lincoln points to the start of the country, not at the Constitution, but he points to it at the Declaration of Independence. And when he says that, he is saying that we were all one nation at that point, which is a controversial thing, because some people say we weren't one nation until the Constitution. And also in the Declaration of Independence, it says, of course, all men are created equal. And he says that we created our country based on that idea. And that's why he takes us back 7 to that, and he's saying that's what we are about, that all men are created equal. That is really cool. It's a cool idea. I don't think it's true. We didn't become one nation at that point, and this is just my opinion. We didn't become one nation at that point. Also, the Declaration of Independence is not about that all men are created equal. That's not what it's about. It's literally a Declaration of Independence. It's saying that these 13 states have the right to self-determination. And it's not really about, so you could make a really good case, I think, that what our country is about rebellion. And what our country is about, protecting our rights, yes, but it's also about being frustrated with government, and it's about all the things that we learned about in the American Revolution, about smuggling and about individualism and about all of those things as well. And so it's not like we just declared our independence and said we are all created equal and that's the only thing we care about. There's a whole lot of stuff in the Declaration of Independence, and all men created equal is one of them, yes. Okay. So that's the first part. And then, of course, he uses this word dedicated here to say that the nation was dedicated. Okay. And I guess there's another thing here as well. To even say that we are a nation is, at that time especially, that was disputed. Some people like George Washington really like to call us one nation or a nation. Some people like to refer to us as a country or a collection of nations. And so to say one nation, a new nation that was a singular thing was kind of a controversial thing at the time and something that would have been debated very much so up until the Civil War. And that's something that after the Civil War is something that we no longer really debated. We were like, okay, fine, we're one nation, indivisible and all that stuff. All right. He says, now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war and come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. All right. So what is being tested by the war is the question I asked, is whether a republic, a free country, can continue. Okay, so he says, all right, he says, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate. And whenever I say this, I always emphasize the we. We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate. Who is he talking about? He's talking about the people who were there at the speech, at the dedication ceremony. We can't do anything about this, okay? We can't make this ground special. Who has? The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here. They have made it important because of their deeds, okay? We can't make it good or bad or anything like that. They've already done that, okay? And then he goes on to say, the world will little note nor long remember what we say here. I mean, who cares? We're here talking. Nobody cares about what we're saying here, but it can never forget what they did here, the people who fought. Okay, and so what are we doing here? What's the purpose of us? He needs to give us a purpose here, something to go out and do. So then he says, it is for us, the living, rather. Okay, he's going to tell us what to do here. It is to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. And so here we are. We have the people who fought here fought for a reason. They nobly advanced this idea. Quite possibly the idea that all men are created equal. And it is for us to finish that unfinished work. Okay, we need to finish that. Okay, so that's his call to action statement for us. Okay, and so then what else should we do? And this is, of course, probably the best part of the speech, like the most beautiful. Anyway, so he says, it is rather for us to be here dedicated. And so there's that word dedicated again. At the beginning, the country was dedicated that all men are created equal. And then at the end, he says, it is for us, the people who are listening to the speech or the people who are learning about this, it's for us to be dedicated. Okay, we are going to take this idea and move it forward. Great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion for that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. Beautiful line there, of course. The last full measure of devotion. Tugs at the heartstrings and stuff like that. And so that's we have to take our increased devotion, our dedication to what those people fought for. And that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. If we don't continue this war and finish it and complete the task that we're here to do, then they've died in vain. Their deaths haven't mattered. This battleground was meaningless. And this nation, under God, throws that in there, religious time, shall have a new birth of freedom. Okay, and so here he's talking about conception, the beginning of something. Very, very, very beginning of something. And then here he says new birth. And so a couple things there. One, you've got the conception, like the thing that's starting here, and then we're going to have a new birth of freedom. So we've gone on. Boom, now we have a new birth of freedom. And then also, when you talk about new birth, you can think about being born again. And again, religious time. And he just said under God. So it takes your brain to God, religion, and then he says new birth. New birth is could be born again. And if you're understanding of the Christian faith, then you understand new birth is like, oh, I've been living, but suddenly I'm changed. Okay? I have this realization that Jesus is my Savior, okay, and I'm going through this change. I'm being born again, okay? And so Lincoln takes this and he says, we are having a new birth of freedom. Okay, this government shall, the people shall, the nation shall. Okay, new birth of freedom. We're being born again. We've lived, but now we've been saved. We've received this salvation through the blood of the soldiers. Okay, you make that connection there with the sacrifice of a Savior, of a Messiah, of a Christ-like figure, and then in the war you have the sacrifice of the soldiers. Okay, and then the blood that they spilt on that hallowed ground is pouring out this being born again. Okay, the sacrificing for the sins of the nation, and then you have this rebirth of the nation right here. It's a new birth of freedom, laying out what he wants the country to be about. Okay, and then he says what the government is. Okay, and what we're supposed to be, and what's happening here. And he said earlier that he said whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated about all those things that we already talked about can long endure. Can this nation endure? He's talking about. And then at the end he says that government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Hey, can the government endure? Yes, it can. We will prove it to you. Okay, this government that is supposed to be for you and by you and of you and all of those things, it's not going anywhere. It will not perish from the earth. And then, of course, going back to this new birth of freedom, being born again, in the Gospels of John, it says, you'll have everlasting life. You shall not perish. You'll be born again. You shall not perish. Okay, it's bringing us back to that religious feeling, the religious ideas and the religious culture, the Christian culture that they had in America at that time. And so, you're being born again through the blood of the people who are sacrificing, and then you shall not perish from the earth. You'll have everlasting life. It will live forever. And so he's making these connections. It's a really brilliant speech. Oh my gosh. And so he's making all of these connections, just a few words here. And the people who would have heard it, or the people who were reading at the time, would have really made these connections right away. Another thing here real fast before I run out of time is that he says the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. It's interesting that he's saying that the government is about the proposition that all men are created equal here. But then he says down at the bottom that the government is of, by, and for the people. And so that would tell me that that is something that this country is supposed to be about. People would have made the case then that forcing the South back into a government that they didn't want to be a part of, that is not government of, by, and for the people. Suspending the elections in Maryland, throwing certain newspapermen and congressmen in jail for having a dissenting opinion, that is not government of, for, and by the people. Okay, that's not freedom. Okay, that's not the new birth of freedom. And so this connection here to what the government is about is a bit of a stretch. It sounds really cool. But his idea of like this government that's for the people, that wouldn't have made sense to a Southerner who's going to say, well, I don't want to be part of this government at all, and you're forcing me in this. That's not a government for me. That's not a government of me if you're not even letting me vote. And so that's kind of a really interesting stretch here that he makes from the beginning to the end. But there's no doubt that this speech is beautiful, and it does a great job of setting forth what the war should be about or could be about, and what he wanted it to be out, and saying, hey, it's November of 63 here. We've still got a ways to go. Nobody knew at the time, but we've still got another year and a half to go here, and we need to push forward and really honor what these people have done and finish the task that remains here before us. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that talk. I'm sure there's much, much more to pour over about this speech, but I hope you enjoyed it as much as I always enjoy pouring over the speech. Thanks, guys.